Hello. So I know we've covered a lot of information for exam. So what I'd like to do is provide you with a walkthrough of the type of questions that you can expect on the exam. Let me give you a quick window into my process. When I make up any exam, what I do is I look at the homeworks and the concept quiz questions and then generate exam questions from those. So what I'm going to do now is live with you on the screen. I'm going to scroll through the draft view as I have it right now and tell you the types of problems that are on the exam. With that said, I need to stress that this is not a comprehensive look at all of the problems on the exam. I'm scrolling through a draft of the test to indicate at a high level most of the key topics that are covered. I may miss some topics. I may add or cut some questions from the final version of the exam. Okay, with that overview, let's get started. Okay, so first thing is we'll start with chapter 2. So hint, 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 there might not be an explicit question from chapter 1, but you definitely need to know, we talked about capital market transactions versus a transaction to pay your accounts payable or something. So you need to know the difference between those two. In chapter 2, we took a look at shorting. We did an example in class. I think there was a homework example. There are practice problems with shorting. So make sure you know how to do those. And you can lose money or make money with those. Make sure you understand both types of problems. We did a similar thing with options in chapter 2. We looked at the one case where you would want to exercise your options, and then we looked at the other case where you would not want to exercise your options. So make sure you understand both of those. The other thing is please be very careful to read the problems carefully, because I might say something like, you plan to short 2 shares of stock instead of 1. That just means you have to multiply everything by 2, right? So be careful when you read so you don't miss something important like that. Then nothing explicit from chapter 3, but of course we need to know some accounting. So we jump to chapter 4, and you should definitely count on having to solve a straightforward balance sheet valuation problem. Not one that's as complicated as Drilling Unlimited, where, remember, we had the real world. There was a real possibility that COMA was going to disallow fracking in New York, which he did go on to do. So we included that with a probability weighted set of scenarios. Nothing like that, but just a straightforward balance sheet valuation problem or two. And definitely, once you get your intrinsic value estimate for the company's worth using that, make sure you can compute Mr. Market's estimate of the company's worth, compare the two, and make an investment decision. If your intrinsic value estimate is much higher than Mr. Market's, you probably want to invest and buy some shares and become a part owner, or buy the whole company maybe. So then after chapter 4, we zipped on to chapter 6. And in chapter 6, we had our 5 frameworks for understanding a company's health through its financial statements and the 5 sets of ratios that went with that. So expect something that looks very much like the homeworks we've been doing in chapter 6, where you have an incomplete ratio analysis, you're asked to compute some ratios, and then you're asked some questions, probably not about the ratios you computed, because I don't want error propagation, but about other ratios in the analysis to make sure you understand them at the level of questions that we've been doing in class. So count on some concept questions and some numerical questions. And then today we went on to 6B, and we didn't spend too much time on conceptual questions. You should know that ROE market value is generally a better measure than ROE gap, right? Debt to enterprise value, a better measure of financial leverage than debt to cap. Some very strange exceptions like meme stocks, but in general, that holds up pretty well. And then we talked a little bit about the DuPont identity. There's not much I can ask you about that because we only had 1 page on the whole DuPont identity, but might be good to, in your, what I would call a helper handout rather than a helper sheet, like a helper 10 pages, just print that page out of the notes, and that's all you could ever need to know about the DuPont framework and the DuPont identity. So that would be it for Chapter 6. Make sure you can do those ratios I showed you. Then lastly, we looked at some examples showing how financial leverage works. We saw that in the Cowboys versus the Conservatives, the private equity example. And then we saw that in the capital budgeting, classic industrial company type of example with home flippers doing the Silverleaf project. And then today, we did that very straightforward example of comparing West End, which has all fixed costs, with a company that has much more variable costs. And we saw that, like financial leverage, the company with much higher fixed costs is going to do way better in good times, but definitely have more risk of bankruptcy in bad times. So you should be familiar with those examples. That's really pretty much it. That's all I have right now. I might have skipped a question because I skimmed a little too fast here. I might add something, but this gives you the great bulk of what the exam is going to look like.